Hello, everyone. This is Nathan Chu again, broadcasting, well, sort of live here from the Philippines. And it's 3 p.m. in the afternoon here. And I heard from my guest today, or my friend today, uh, that it's 9 a.m. in his part of the globe. He's in Sweden. And his name is Dr. Niklas Torneke. He's one of my favorite, should I say, act therapists or psychologists or RFT practitioner, whatever you call it. All right. Uh, so how are you, Nicholas, over there? Is it starting to get colder?
Yeah, it's starting to get colder actually. I've been away for a week. I've been to Turkey at the European conference of CBT, the annual conference. So it was nice in Turkey. It was warm. And when I left Sweden, it was pretty okay also. But now I came back, it was much colder. It's not still, it's autumn, like 10 degrees Celsius outside or something. And yeah, but the sun is
Okay.
shining.
All right. We don't have that. Maybe when in certain places in the Philippines, way up in the mountains, but not here.
Yeah.
Anyway, we only have two seasons here. It's an old joke.
Okay.
Hot and hotter. All right.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well,
okay. So, Nicholas, can you tell our audience more about yourself and your practice? What made you want to be a psychologist in the first place?
yeah, that's the first point. I am not a psychologist. I'm a psychiatrist.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's yeah, here we go. Yeah. So well, there were many things in that. Maybe equivalent question would be why I would go for psychiatry then, studying medicine. Well, I think it was a general interest in human beings and
Uh,
the sort of psychiatry sort of brings together, medicine,
mm,
psychology, social factors, whatever. So yeah, and then I was, I think even when I did my the time at the medical school with
yeah.
psychiatry, I got an interest in psychotherapy. So that's what I sort of have been focusing on as a psychiatrist. I'm in Sweden. In Sweden, to be a psychotherapist is a protected title, so it's licensed and then sort of a. So it's yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit like. Well, of course, you're not a psychologist, but on the clinical level, you can say that, you practice psychotherapy just as a psychologist would, basically. But then, of course, you have different backgrounds and different specialities. So,
Okay. All right. Well, my my own impression of psychiatry, at least from my own experience, is that mostly it's the biomedical,
yeah,
let's say, frame of thinking, and
it's
I
become
don't
more.
know. It's probably you're one of the uh, rare cases where psychiatrists would focus on actually talk therapy or psychotherapy.
Yeah. In Sweden, when I started, it was still many psychiatrists actually were also psychotherapists and focused on that part. But if you look to my country, it's been like you say, it's more and more a medical focus is on medical issues
Oh,
or
it's the
medical.
same. All right.
Yeah, it's the same in Sweden. It differs in different countries. As I told you, I was recently in Turkey, and there a lot of the psychotherapists are psychiatrists. It's another tradition. So it differs, but I think overall, if you look at it globally, of course, it's more like you say. Most countries, especially at least in the Western world, and maybe in Asia further east, it's the psychiatrists are more focused on medical or biological, pharmacological treatment, basically.
Oh,
Uh,
I see. All right.
yeah, but in
Okay.
Sweden, yeah, so it
Mm-hmm.
differs a bit. Yeah,
Yeah, because I find it hard to imagine, having to study the biological makeup plus psychotherapy alone is such a difficult, wide-ranging field. So having to do
Well,
both is really quite a challenging, you know.
yeah, interesting. Also, it's a kind of a holistic view of human
Mm-hmm.
beings. You can say. In the best case, in the best case.
All right. Okay. All right. So, how about I know that your background is more on psychodynamic.
Well, I started that. That was because that was what dominated the field when I got into psychiatry. So that's
Uh,
where I started, sort of. But my more the training to be a licensed psychotherapist, which is 3 years, half time in Sweden. That's the Swedish system.
mm,
That I did within, basically a Beckian cognitive therapy.
mm,
This was back in the 90s. Then, of course, nowadays everybody says CBT.
uh-huh,
Well, it's the same tradition, but if you sort of, there are a lot of different models, right? So my
uh-huh,
basic training was in the more the Beckian style.
uh-huh,
And then I became a little bit more behavioral over the years, and then I met ACT back in 98. So it's 25 years ago when I
mm,
started, met
uh-huh,
Steve Hayes and some of the other leading figures, and then
uh,
I started to do ACT, and went to the US, to Reno, to see Steve, and to
mm,
learn from some of that work they're doing. So that was the
mm.
beginning. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
because
it's,
I
yeah.
started with, my graduate studies, where was focused on psychodynamic therapy. And,
Mm-hmm.
there are, I remember back then, I mean, how can we treat people like animals, like
Oh,
they
yeah,
were
yeah.
rats, or the attachment styles, if we punish or negatively reinforce or whatever, it's like manipulating a child, so how are you
Oh,
able
yeah,
to get over those objections? That's from the school of thought of psychodynamic,
yeah.
it's
Well, I think,
we're more complicated than just a few processes,
yeah, yeah. Well, I think that debate was more alive, say 30, 40 years ago. I mean,
uh
if you look at some of the modern things that dominate psychotherapy more generally, like you mentioned attachment, right? Attachment.
mhm, mhm,
Now, attachment is based on non-human research. It's based on primates, okay,
mhm,
other primates than humans. Another area which is very sort of highlighted today is affect theory, right?
mhm, mhm,
Basic research is done on rats. Uh,
mm,
I think that, from an evolutionary perspective, I think the
mhm,
argument sort of at, you know, human beings are not, I think that's, evolution works the way that things are kept. There are changes, but the functioning, the well-functioning systems are retained during the evolutionary process. So I think that the idea that you could not learn about humans studying other animals is, today no serious scientist would claim that. I mean, you would say that of course you can learn things from animal research. Of course, then there is differences, and I think it's one of the main differences that is extremely fundamental to ACT also
mhm,
is human language,
uh-huh, uh-huh,
because that's a really something really happens evolutionary when human beings start to use this tool, whenever it was, it's way back, of course. But and I also think that, how can I say, a lot of now the theoretical criticism of behaviorism, I think, is simply out of date. And that's simply out of date. I mean,
out of what,
modern
sorry,
date.
out of date, all right,
Yeah,
okay,
I think that's out of date. But of
uh-huh,
course, the behavioral therapy movement have
mhm,
a lot of historical flaws. I mean, that tradition there were mistakes made. So I mean, you don't have to defend sort of everything in the background of behaviorism, but I think the scientific base of it remains solid, and more solid, I would say, than any other theoretical standpoint in psychology.
Okay.
For me personally, I don't think, it was a kind of a path from the psychodynamic thinking and to more cognitive information processing, and then modern behaviorism. Of course, that the problems with the psychodynamic position has always been the scientific. I mean, it's not well rooted in modern science. That's a huge issue. I mean, you can discuss different things, but
all right.
For me, it was sort of, it's like climbing a ladder or something. You get. It was no major shift. It was.
Yeah, I think I heard someone say before that it's not a difference of quality, but more about quantity. In terms of our difference with the animals. Does that make sense? Like we just added, we basically behave the way animals do. We just added language into it.
Yeah, but that's an enormous that really changes things, though. That's a huge. It's not just a little thing on the top. It changes not everything, but it changes a lot. Human language is very sort of invasive, so to speak.
Invasive,
yeah, dominates totally. Once human beings have this repertoire, there's a lot of change compared to other animals, I mean.
All right. Okay. So that's where RFT comes in, right? Okay.
Because RFT, of course, is a
or relational frame theory, just for our audience to understand.
Yeah.
So, I read one of your books, and I do use some of your metaphors. I'm sorry, I'm plagiarizing you in the counseling room. And one of them is the roller coaster. You remember that?
Yeah.
Book of metaphors or something. I'm sorry, metaphors. I forgot the title, but it's and I noticed that when I use a metaphor that's kind of related to the client, they begin to react. They become a bit defensive, or they would argue their point. Well, I don't treat my wife like this, or my kids like that, But when I use like metaphors as concrete as like a roller coaster ride, something that's really very objective, or in a sense very simple. Why is that? How does that work? Can you explain it in the most layman-like terms on how it works in the human psyche?
Metaphor or a metaphor? Well, a metaphor is simply talking about one thing using something else.
Okay.
Right? So let's say, for example, you talk about feelings, say about anger or because it's hard to describe more exactly what is it like to be angry.
Okay.
No, it's not. In most languages, I think when people start to spontaneously talk about such as, if you would ask somebody out on the street, okay, what is it like to be angry? The chance they will use a metaphor is pretty high. It's like they will say, oh, it's like, and then comes something. And I think it has to do with, the fact we use metaphors for talking about things that are hard to describe in more literal language. Because then we use an object that we know better. Let's say that I say about a particular woman, say, or the person, she is a rock.
She's a what?
A rock.
A rock. Okay.
Yeah. Well, of course, that tells you something about her, right?
Mhm.
And using and there are some particular maybe the best metaphor, the best way to say that metaphor, she is a rock, will work especially well if you can see a little bit about this quality in her also.
Mm.
Whatever
Mm.
quality that is. Now, if you say that somebody's a rock, I
Mhm.
guess it's something about steadfastness or
Mhm. Mhm.
being hard to move, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And that quality of steadfastness, say,
Mhm.
or weight or something, well, yeah, steadfastness, that is more salient or more clear
Mhm.
in the rock.
Mhm.
But by saying that she is a rock, she sort of bring that quality over to her, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the way metaphors work. You talk about something, you want to talk about something which is in the metaphor terminology is called the target or the topic, what you want to talk about, and then you use something else, something outward, something that is more clear or concrete, and
Uh-huh.
it sort of helps you see, for example, the steadfastness in this woman. If I say, oh, she's a rock,
Okay.
you know.
All right. Okay. All right. So let's say your roller coaster or your fire alarm, metaphor. All right. You remember the fire alarm in your
Yeah, yeah,
ABC?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So how do you connect that to one of the 6 flexibility skills?
Oh, well, I think it's actually even more basic than any of these 6 flexibility sort of
Yeah.
aspects in referring to this
Nicholas,
hexagon.
can I interrupt for a moment? Maybe I
Yes.
should switch earphones. I really can't hear you very well.
Okay.
All right,
Okay.
hold on. Go ahead, you can speak. I can still hear you.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I think the clearest, if you relate it to a psychological process or flexibility, as you said, the whole thing is that then of course you have to go into to understand the whole idea in ACT about what is really psychological problems, and of course in ACT, psychological problems are considered side effects of human language.
Mm-hmm.
Our private responses, thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
feelings, memories, bodily sensations,
Mm-hmm.
can be they can obtain very complex functions, right? So due to our language ability, we can sort of talk to ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and those phenomena, thoughts, feelings,
Mm-hmm.
they become self-instructions. They sort of tell us what to do. Now, even it can be more cognitive, a thought, but it can also be an emotion, right? But the emotion will sort of be telling you what to do, in a sense. If you're angry,
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
sort of move something away. If you're
Mm-hmm.
sad, maybe it more sort of it instructs you in the passive way to draw back, or something like that. If you're curious,
Mm-hmm.
it sort of instructs you to move forward, to take a closer look, right? So
Okay.
all these private responses,
Mm-hmm.
they function as self-instructions, more explicit sometimes and more implicit, but
Mm-hmm.
still self-instructions. Now,
Uh-huh.
that's very helpful. I mean, language is extremely helpful for human beings. You
Mm-hmm.
mentioned in one of the emails you sent me, the concept of rule governed behavior.
Yes, yes.
That just means the ability to follow instructions. I
Mm-hmm.
mean,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
follow instructions. Now, that of course is very helpful, because then you can interact with things that are not present, and you can
Yes, yes.
have a lot of cooperation with other people,
Mm-hmm.
joining your attempts in different directions. So
Mm-hmm.
it's very helpful, but at the same time, there
Mm-hmm.
are risks. There is
Uh-huh.
the side effect of human language that
Mm-hmm.
you can sort of be so hooked up on particular instructions. You must do this, you must do this, I can't, that other possible aspects of the context is blocked, or this particular self-instruction dominates your behavior in a problematic way. Then, and this is a key thing in ACT, then to be more flexible or to behavior in a more functional way, you need to be able to interact with your own responding thoughts, feelings in a particular way, so that there is some kind of a distance between yourself and that thought. For example, if it's a thought, say that a thought says, I can't do this. And let's say this is problematic because this blocks you, right? So then if you can then take this sort of, you call it some kind of a observational distancing, being able to notice, here is this thought I have, but there is more, right? And I am more. I can have that thought and still act independently. That's a flexible behavior, right? This is in ACT, the most easy or clearest way, I think maybe this is discussed in ACT, is fusion diffusion.
Yes.
Right. You're fused. If you're fused, then there is no distinction between yourself and that particular thought.
Yes.
In a state of diffusion, or if you manage to diffuse, it means that you can sort of, establish an observational distance. Here is this thought. Okay. Yeah, that's the basic idea in ACT on what is the key process in therapy here. Now, metaphor can serve this purpose or this process in different ways, but I think the key thing is that when you talk about thoughts and feelings, for example, metaphorically, that is, you use an outward object to talk about a thought or a feeling. It supports this observational distancing, because the you use is an outside object. When you have this, for example, anxiety response, and the therapist says, here comes the alarm. Then alarms are things, we have met a lot of alarms outside, right? A red alarm in the traffic, or a sound or something. All these things are outward from our perspective, right? They belong to the environment. And so when you say that my anxiety, in a sense, is like an alarm, it sort of moves anxiety out, so it supports this process of observational distancing. And I think that's one of the key things with using metaphor in therapy. Then there are other general things about, metaphor, like easy to remember, or it's easier to talk about complex things that are difficult to talk about. But this, I think, if you go for the process of therapy, I think this sort of, it supports the observational distancing, I think, or diffusion, if you prefer. Or there are other terms in different types of psychotherapy for this, decentering of your own responding, or different terminology, I think. Okay.
I forgot to mention the title of this.
Yeah. Well, I did
series,
already.
Shrinks Over Drinks. I will give you a toast for that. That was excellent. Beautiful. The title is different again this time. This time is Two Shrinks Over Drinks Again. Anyway, all right. That's great. Now I realized how metaphors are connected to diffusion. And for the audience here who may not understand what diffusion is, what we're doing is used to be called comprehensive distancing, that we are not our thoughts.
That's that's a term that's been used, that was used ACT was actually called comprehensive distancing once upon a time. And I think that term is good, actually, because it sort of points to the center, I think.
And I want to jump into that question. Well, let me jump to it. You said in one of your interviews, and I was in that group with Matthew Villat, you said probably the biggest contribution you think of ACT in therapy is diffusion.
Yeah, I think
So
so.
I did ask Stephen Hayes that. I mentioned your name in that interview when I
Okay.
said, Dr. Niklas said diffusion is your best, probably one of your greatest contributions. And he said, well, it's actually RFT, but I think there's a connection between RFT and diffusion.
Yeah,
I mean, of course, he didn't say it that way. He said it in more
yeah,
authoritative and definitive manner. So
yeah,
why does
yeah.
diffusion for you count to be the number one thing?
If you look at the ACT, I would say that. But then I agree, of course, that the relational frame theory is a more basic contribution.
Uh,
And of course, one of the, I mean, relational frame theory can more technically describe what diffusion is, I think.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. All right. Okay. Well, for me, I think there are two things that amaze me about ACT, which I didn't know prior to meeting ACT, is diffusion and values. All
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
Because I thought that psychology has to be without values, zero.
Oh,
I mean, you're just a sounding board, trying to, you know, get that symptom relief, and after the sadness or the anger or the anxiety goes away, then they can move forward with their lives. So that's the next question I have, and this has to, it was related to what you said, rule following or rule governed behavior. Um,
mhm.
uh, Correct me if I'm wrong, because values are also rules, right?
There are particular types of rules. Yeah, you can say so. Yeah.
Yeah. So are we saying that you said that, yeah, rule following in a sense is not bad because when your mom tells you don't touch that, dog, it's gonna bite you, then you don't have to experience that. So uh how do you kind of distinguish, because let's say we were born in World War II and we had some Jews hide in our house and we learned from our parents that we should never lie, and then you're in a context where lying is more functional, uh, and it's more values oriented. So I don't know, how do you, because I heard Steve Hayes say, well, values are also very sticky. They're also rules. It's kind of like in the same
I,
realm as like the rule governed behavior that leads into dysfunction or being stuck. So
mhm.
how can you explain that in, let's say, in a more concrete example? Maybe use a metaphor. I don't know.
Well, I think that, I mean, values is about where you want to go, or in
Okay.
what direction you want to go.
Okay.
It's not just a goal somewhere in the future, but it's an action now in the direction that is important to you.
Okay.
So of course, you could say that in the example you gave by being in World War II and trying to help some people get away from the Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, if the Nazis ask you for them, yeah, you don't want to tell them the truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
seller or whatever.
Well, there's a strong logical side that says, well, you're gonna get executed if you do, right? That's a logical mind, right?
Yeah, of course, but I mean, yeah. But as for the lying part, I think
Mm,
that at least from an act perspective, then, or from this, it's all about what
uh-huh.
is most important to you. Now, is it
Yeah.
most important for you to be a person who always speaks the truth, or is it more important for you to be the one, in this case,
Uh,
protecting people that are in real danger?
uh,
uh, these are, and of course, in a sense, you could say these two are conflicting then in that particular situation.
yeah.
But well, I mean, you could say what if you would stick to, you have to tell the truth. So now you will tell the Nazis where the Jewish people are.
Uh-huh.
Uh, for what is that done?
Mm-hmm.
Is
Mm-hmm.
it, is it is it just, well, I should. There's no. This is just what I should.
That's still a
There's no.
rule.
I must speak the truth. There's no.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right.
But then, of course, then that would seem to me in this situation to be too rigid, right? It doesn't serve. It doesn't serve the definitely doesn't serve these people hiding. And the question is, does it serve who you want to be?
Yeah, like let me give a more, let's say, contemporary example in an act, in maybe some of the cases that we see in the counseling room. Like, I can only be a nice husband if my wife changes, or I
Yeah,
can
yeah,
only I learned this rule that kids have to be punished, in a certain way, because that's the rule that I learned from my,
yeah.
parents.
This will be the situation then that
Uh-huh.
where diffusion would be, or that process would be helpful, because if
Mhm.
you if there is a certain rule,
Uh-huh.
basically regardless of whatever, but
Mhm.
the rule, let's say that
Mhm.
I should my children should obey me,
Uh-huh.
because then I'm a good father.
Because I'm a good father. Okay.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right.
yeah, something like that. Then of course, if this works fine,
Uh-huh.
then it works fine. I mean, but if people come to therapy, of course they come because something is not working for them.
Okay. All right.
Or why would they sit in front of the therapist?
Yes, yes.
Uh,
I can't
so
get along with my teenager, something like that.
okay, so there is a problem then.
Yeah.
And then the question is, okay, how are you behaving in relation to your teenagers? And then eventually in a dialogue, you will see, oh, there's a strong rule here. They
Uh-huh.
must obey me. And
Mm-hmm.
then, of course, by being able to take this observational distancing, to see, okay, this is a rule I have. This is a rule I have. To
Okay.
notice the rule. Well, of course, if you know in the first place, when the client comes, he's probably fused with the rule. That's just it. I mean, there's no other way, right? This is the rule, and this is it. I
Yeah.
act according to the rule. But of course, if you work with that so that the client can see, oh, this is a rule I have.
Okay.
I can have other rules. This is a rule I have. Now I
Like
can still follow it, but I
my
can.
partner should never forget our anniversary. You see
Oh,
that?
yeah, yeah. And in a sense, you could
Uh,
say, okay, your partner should never forget your anniversary. So how is that going?
uh-huh. Okay.
Now, of course, if the client says, well, it's not going well because it's his or her problem. She's the problem. He is the problem.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But of course, then you're back. Okay, but so you are not. Okay, so you come to me, but are you not working with changing something you do? I mean, your partner is not even here. How can I, if
Okay.
you, we have to work with what you do.
Okay. All right. Yes.
That's the situation of therapy, right? I mean, it's you and
Uh,
me.
Uh-huh.
Uh, of course, if you see the couple, then there is a little different situation, because then, but it's still, I think the individual question will be, okay, what you are doing, how is
Uh,
that working?
mm, mm.
And are you willing to take a look at that to see if there should be some change or whatever?
All right. Okay. Okay, cool. All right. So, let me ask you this. Now, this is something that I've come across with some of my readings. Uh, no, maybe let's do this. This one I heard Stephen Hayes talk about. Some
Okay.
of the quickest road to I'm just paraphrasing. The quickest road to psychopathology is rule following and experiential avoidance. Okay.
Okay.
For the sake of our audience, how does that happen?
Well, it happens as if you go for rule following. As I said before, rule following is in itself
Uh,
is flexible. I mean, human beings, we do this all the time, and it's very helpful.
yeah.
The problem on psychopathology is it's more like a side effect.
Uh,
The overall, rule following is helpful. I mean, otherwise, without rule following,
We'll
we
just be
couldn't
like
have.
the animals, right?
Yeah. There is not. I mean, definitely.
Yeah.
But so it's very helpful, and it has side effects. And the side effects are that that we easily come to follow certain rules, even though it's not helpful. Because we just, we are so trained in that we tend to do, for example, like the ones you mentioned. My partner must be like this and this, or my kids must do that and that, or I have to check, I have to,
Or my partner should never disappoint me, should never
yeah,
hurt me.
that's a tough one, right?
So that's experiential avoidance, right? I should never
Well,
get
I
hurt.
mean, experiential avoidance comes to the fact that many of the rules or instructions that we follow seems to be connected to and tell us that we should not feel certain things, we should not think certain things, we should not remember certain things, because all these things in one way or another is painful to us, and then we should get rid of them, like we should, we get rid of other things in the outward environment that we don't want. But the problem, I mean, if you want to change something in your environment, the idea sort of, if you don't like something, make a plan of how to get rid of it, and then do it. That works fine. It doesn't always work, of course, because there are many things we cannot move, right? But overall, we can do a lot with the environment and to avoid things we don't want. But that's when we apply that to our thoughts and feelings and memories, that's very problematic, because we don't have that kind of control. Feelings come spontaneously, memories come spontaneously. There's no way to really protect yourself from your own memories.
Correct.
Or, in a sense, maybe to a certain extent, you can act so that you will not, for example, remember something. But then typically it will come to a cost. I mean, if you, let's say that, I get very anxious when I meet people, say. Okay. Can I avoid that? Yeah, of course you can avoid meeting people. You isolate yourself in your home. And maybe you will get a little bit, maybe you will get less anxiety, but the cost is enormous. If you really, so it's very hard to avoid your own feelings and thoughts and memories.
All right. Okay. Excellent. So this next question. All right. Now, in the first decade of my work, I used to just do the thing where, okay, this is your issue. Okay, let me try this approach for this. Okay. I have to pick up a book. Let's say it's anger. I have to pick up a book about anger and study that. And I said, oh my gosh, this is impossible. This is gonna cost me a fortune if I do this. All right. So when I encountered acts, I have so many terms I have to remember. This is a pragmatic approach, contextual behavioral science, functional contextualism, probabilistic thinking. So can you, we're talking to a general audience here. So can you take it one by one? How do you arrange all that in a sequence so people can understand this philosophy of science? Because it used to be, it's just like a technique I pick out from one approach to another, depending on the case. Oh, when it's a phobia, I use traditional CBT. When it's more something about, let's say, depression, then I go to psychodynamic. So that was my sort of worldview before, about what psychotherapy or counseling is. So can you, let's say, where do we start? Is it functional contextualism, pragmatism, probabilistic thinking? What is it?
If we're talking to the general public, or say a client, then, or then I would say you start with much more, practical things. You can say something like, if you look at life, your life, my life, one basic thing is that we're trying to go somewhere, right? It's like a path. We're walking along our path, right? We want to go somewhere. Now, and of course, then it might be a little bit different things we want, but still, there's a direction. There's a direction, and we behave to move in that direction.
Yes.
Now, there are two types of problems that can come. Either something comes in the environment, something stops us. I want to travel, but I don't have the money. Okay. So of course, then it's problem solving in some way, or maybe I can't travel or whatever. But then there's another thing, and that is the things that more turn up within me, like fear or sadness, or or a memory, maybe that sort of seems to block my way. If I have this, and then, of course, if you talk to a client here, you can give concrete examples, because the client comes to you maybe with anxiety, for example, or depression, feeling depressed. So then you can say, okay, if let's say it was a depressed client, then you say, okay, so you were sort of on your way, you were, having certain directions, but now then depression came. This feeling of loss of energy, feeling sad, probably some events happened, and therapy is about dealing with these issues that turn up. If it's sadness, or it's anger, or it's anxiety, or whatever, the principle is the same. How will you deal with these phenomena that turn up within yourself? How do you deal with feelings and thoughts and memories that sort of seem to block your way? And that's what it's about. That's where you start if you want to understand I think therapy. And of course that's true regardless of what kind of symptoms you have, because the same process is true regardless. I mean, it's one side is, okay, what is the direction? Where do you really want to go? And on the other hand, what is it that blocks the way? And how can you deal with what blocks you so that you can continue in the direction you want to go? Pretty simple sort of setup.
Okay. Yeah, because go ahead. Yeah, there's a thing about, I had a chance to read an article, Stephen Hayes, from the New Atlantis or something. And there's this fear that pragmatism will result into moral relativism or something.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
So how do you address that? I mean, when we say pragmatism, I think I'm guessing we always say this: truth criterion is what works. All right. So it kind of starts to ring alarm bells from people when I say this. Oh, so you mean I can just, whatever works for me, I can just kill someone if I wanted to, because for a higher end, something like that.
Yeah, but I mean, of course, if it's really, really important to you, for some very strange reason to kill somebody, you probably will. But I don't, of course, most of us don't agree with that kind of direction, right? The vast majority don't agree. So I think that the thing is about pragmatism in science, that is that you will have to state what is your value direction, then where do you want to go. And of course science will then build on agreed directions. Because if somebody who is a scientist says, I want to work on, I don't know, you know, shutting down the
let's say
sun.
I think in Europe, in our country, I'll use an example, prostitution, you know.
Okay.
I think in certain parts of the world, since it's unavoidable, or maybe even abortion, it's this kind of like statistical or probabilistic thinking to cause and effect thinking, like deterministic thinking. If we allow same-sex marriage, then everybody's gonna, marry their animals or something. It's gonna desecrate everything, something like
Yeah.
that. So, so
But that's simply not true, because people don't want to marry their animals. If you start a movement when my direction is to marry a horse. Of course, I don't know, but
yeah,
most people, the enormous majority will say, okay, we don't go with you in that direction.
okay. So that's
That's not
probabilistic thinking, right?
yeah. I mean, then of course there are if you take more sort of how can I say, realistic point of views that people still disagree about, say like abortion, or like
Same,
same-sex marriage.
yes,
Say
example.
okay, so yeah, well, people do take a different stance on this, but then you will probably follow the people that you agree with.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happens, right? It's no,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, uh, this is, I mean, many people, do you prefer democracy, or do you prefer, strong
Authoritarian.
rule?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know.
Uh-huh.
Uh, it's always like that. I mean, if you have a direction,
Uh-huh.
if you are the only one with that direction,
Mm-hmm.
well, it will affect. Of course, you can have very, very strange directions, and some people have, right? I mean,
Uh-huh.
you serial killers, to take an example. Of course, these things happen, but I don't understand why. I don't
Uh-huh.
think that, you know, the values are up to, that
Uh-huh.
you can choose your value.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't mean that everybody will do whatever. I mean, people will agree on things,
Uh-huh.
and in science,
Uh-huh.
uh, in all this pragmatic thinking, it
Uh-huh.
is, you have to state your direction so that others can decide if they want to go with you or not.
Okay.
So a scientist that states a value or a
Mm-hmm.
goal, nobody else wants to go in that direction. Well,
Mm.
his influence will be, or his or her influence will be very, very small, if any.
Mm. Okay.
It's
All right.
always about stating your state, and so you can
Good.
say that, okay, my goal is that it's a good thing for society to acknowledge same-sex marriage. Okay, then I mean,
Uh-huh.
who will side up with you? That's the way it is, right?
Okay.
And some will side up against you, perhaps. It might be different countries, etc.
All right. Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
So time flies. We only have about 10 minutes left.
Mhm.
So I'll come up with this question. I've seen some interviews of V.F. Skinner, and he talked about the fourth estate. So we are supposed to be the fourth estate. First, it's the government, big business, and then the third estate is well, I forgot. There were three estates
Okay, I
that
don't know who it is.
he wrote this book, Walden 2, right?
Yeah.
He was talking about utopia, right? So and he really felt like his science would help contribute in creating that utopia, right? So I wonder what there are certain, let's say, very viral videos of road rage here. People get killed on the road, or pull out a gun because of a minor traffic incident, and they go up to the level of a Senate hearing, and I'm not sure if psychologists are ever involved in talks about, and Steve Hayes mentioned this in our interview, that why aren't there psychologists when the pandemic was here? Because wearing a mask, getting your shots, these are all behaviors. So why
Yeah.
aren't we involved? And what is your grand vision for psychology? Is there a way we can contribute to addressing societal problems, like for the bigger population
Yeah.
groups, like whole countries, or
Yeah.
even worldwide problems? And a lot of this
Yeah.
pollution, these are all behaviors. So
Yeah.
why don't we get a seat at the table?
I think, well, different things to say about that. One thing, I think, in many situations there is a seat at the table. I mean, I remember when this whole discussion about the pandemic, for example, when it started in Sweden, and we had this, how should we do with things?
Mm-hmm.
For example, one of the main arguments in Sweden
Mm-hmm.
for not closing the schools of young children
Mm-hmm.
was a psychological one.
Mm-hmm.
The government, listening to experts, said, okay, this is a bad thing. I mean, this is horrible thing with the virus stuff, but it's not everything. You can't protect us from a virus by causing a lot of harm to young people that they will live with for the rest of their lives, like not getting education. So you must see that there are other issues except for the virus, even when the virus is here, because so that was one of the reasons that in Sweden, except for extremely short periods, they didn't close the schools of young people, because it's too much psychosocial effects of closing down schools. For example, they were at the table, but of course, in many of the big political issues, psychology is still considered an unsure science, compared to some. Unsure. Yeah, not so trustworthy or something, I think. So especially when it's quick
like
and you have
hard science and pure science.
Something like that. Something like that.
Okay.
But of course, it's up to us then to show that we can have effects, if that psychology can actually affect issues.
So
our knowledge.
I guess, Niklas, from your end, what do you think? Where do you think psychology is headed? Some of my guests said it was AI. Some of my guests have said psychedelic psychotherapy. What's this? LSD. So where do you think we're headed? What direction?
I think there are many paths. I don't know. I think artificial intelligence, of course, that would be a strong force, I think. I'm not so convinced about these psychedelic things. We'll see. They tried before. This is not really new. The psychoanalysts did this stuff back in the 50s and 60s. And then, of course, they stopped. I'm not sure. We'll see. As for artificial intelligence, though, I think it's inevitable in some way. That kind of technical advancements, if you look back on history, they break through in one way or another.
Do you imagine a client talking to a robot, something like that?
I don't know. Well, we're not there yet, at least. Of course, maybe you can do it for some.
Well, there's a PsychFlex app right now. You heard about the PsychFlex app?
Yeah. You mean this thing that they're doing within this process-based therapy?
There's an application on your phone where
yeah. Well, it might be helpful for some things. I don't know. I must admit that I'm not very interested. It's so kind of, but maybe I'm old now. Most of my career is behind me, so I don't know. I think there are things here that will be helpful, but I also think that there is a quick jumping into things that will not be helpful.
Mm.
You know, well, it's hard to tell, really. I mean, the future is the most uncertain thing we have, right?
Yes, yes, yes. All right. Okay. So our hour is almost up. It's actually up. So let us have a drink to this.
Okay.
My beverage of choice is water,
Okay.
H2O.
Mine is coffee. Mine is coffee.
All right. Well, thank you, Niklas. I really enjoyed the privilege of talking to you, and
Thank
you know,
you.
I
Thank
I
you.
love I love your work. I love I still have to go through your RFT book. That's too complicated. But your ABCs for human behavior. I think you have 3 books, right?
3 books in English. Yes, that's right. And
In
in other
English.
languages.
Oh, I see. The others are in Norwegian.
Well,
Sorry, Swedish.
we have another book actually. You know, the author that wrote the first ABCs. That
Uh,
book I wrote together with Jonas Ramnerö, a Swedish psychologist,
uh,
and we have actually written yet another book that's not been
uh,
translated. There is
uh,
another book coming actually on clinical behavior or clinical functional analysis coming in Swedish within a month. And hopefully that one will be out in English, but that, we'll see. We'll see.
I'm excited. All right.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Niklas. You take care.
Take care and
All
good luck with
right.
you.
All right. Bye bye.